I bet your Pokemon can't do that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for participating and coming out here today to support this cause. Thank you very much to all the organizers. It is a little telling about humans, I think, or human society, that there are more people at the Pokemon than there is here at the Cecil rally, and I think that's fuel for me to drive me further, because we need to get that crowd here and thinking about it. In a lot of the work that I do, we talk about coexistence being important with wildlife. But actually, I'm a little bit saddened by the word coexistence, because it almost speaks to tolerance. We need to talk about codependence. We must realize that without wildlife, we would not be here. Without bees in the grass behind you, pollinating plants and fruit trees, without nature, we would not exist. So while people are pursuing Pokemons, we are losing lions today. And if we lose lions, we're going to lose Pokemon. So I think that's quite telling, and that's going to drive me, what I've seen today. So I did have a PowerPoint presentation with photographs, and it started with Cecil's roar. There's a video of Cecil roaring. And whenever I watch it, I get goosebumps. So I was going to play it to you, volume 300. And, scare the crap out of any domestic cats for 20 kilometers.
Oh.
That cat. I've lost my chain of thought. Let's just look at Cecil for inspiration. So, I had this presentation, and I'm just going to run it through memory, because we're here to celebrate the life of a lion. The death of that lion has moved us all. It moved the world in an unprecedented way. But our job now is not to dwell on his death. Yes, we want to see action. We want to see that this never happens again. But we need to harness this momentum. We need to get this story, this passion that this lion has inspired, to actually change us, to make sure that our relationship with this planet and the wildlife that we share it with is changed for the better and changed for our children. I've got a little 7-year-old boy. His name's Oliver, and I really cannot fathom the idea of looking him in the eyes one day when we don't have lions left. The accusing look in his eyes one day when we have failed as a generation to preserve the most iconic animal. That'll break my heart. And it's probably out of fear that drives me, because I do not want to look into the children's eyes. And we are the ones, we're this generation that have failed a species that has been with us for 1.5 million years. So I'm going to run through my presentation in my mind, and we'll start on a little anecdote which made a lot of people laugh. I've done a few talks recently, and that's the humble beginnings of a lion researcher. My first encounter with a lion, trouble. My first encounter with a lion was when I was probably about 11 years old. My parents took me to a private game reserve in Zimbabwe, and we rode an elephant, and we canoed, and we had lunch in a tree house. And at the end of the day, we were about to get into our car and go home, but they had a captive lion in an enclosure, and he had been bottle fed and raised, and was quite tame. So I'm obsessed with cats. I dropped on my hands and knees and was tickling this lion to the fence. When he turned and raised his tail, and everyone jumped out of the way, but I was on my hands and knees, so I became his territory, let's put it that way. It's not funny, you try it. So covered head to toe in lion urine. My dad wouldn't have me in the car. So we had to head all the way home, and I remember our Persian cats loved me for weeks. So why lions? Why are we here about a lion when there's so much more going on in the world and so much more going on in conservation? Well, like no other species in the history of humanity has meant as much to us as lions. When we came down from the trees in East Africa years ago, our was the lion. Perhaps the reason we stand upright today, we owe to that. We needed now to see above the grass, so we stood upright. Can you imagine that gift of bipedalism might be linked to that species? We've had an unbroken relationship for 1.5 million years. If you dig down in the ground underneath you, or in some of this landscape, there were lions here. In France, there's caves with cave paintings, 36,000 years old, lions. Our ancestors used to observe lions in France. It's not just an African animal. It was the second most widespread species after human beings. So bar Australia and Antarctica, lions were almost everywhere else. Today we've only got them in Africa. There's a small remnant population in India that amounts to less than 500 lions. So these animals, you know, we've heard some statistics, the numbers, so I won't repeat those. But we are losing lions, and if we are losing the most iconic species, the sexiest species, what hope did the rest have? The pangolins, the porcupines, the spring hares, the bumblebees. So we need to use lions and the emotions and the passion that they inspire to represent those other animals. Cecil. Cecil is probably the lion that woke the world, and I think that's why we're here today. There's a few facts about the Cecil hunt that I need to share with you because there's misinformation that's been spread and repeated and quoted again. So the facts of the hunt are 1st of July, a big elephant carcass. Jericho comes to the bay first, and this is from evidence that I've heard from someone who was on the hunt. Jericho came to the bait first and fed for a full hour with the hunters present before Cecil came and they shot and wounded Cecil. That immediately tells you that they knew Cecil was coming, because you wouldn't turn down Jericho unless you knew something bigger was coming. So that's the first key point. They were after Cecil from the beginning. The next point is he's shot and wounded at 10 o'clock at night on the 1st of July. Because it's a bow hunt, he was shot and wounded with an arrow. Now a wounded lion is too dangerous to pursue at night, so they go home. They go back to their camp, probably celebrate with a couple of whiskeys, and go to bed. All that time, that lion is now sitting wounded with an arrow stuck in his body. They have their breakfast. 9 o'clock the next morning, they jump in the vehicle and go and look for the lion. Now this comes the key point, is they finished him with a second arrow, not with a rifle. It's quoted widely that he was finished off with a rifle. That's not true. In order to maintain it as a trophy hunt, a record application for a bow hunt, he needed to be finished with a second arrow and not a rifle. The minute he's shot with a rifle, the record is disqualified. So that was supposed to be a record lion. That's why they were there for him, because he was the biggest. So they let that animal lie, wounded for 11 hours, not 40. 11 hours through the night, sitting angry with an arrow in his body, before tracking him down, finishing him with a second arrow. That's the cruelty of this. For a record, you would leave an animal wounded for 11 hours just because you want to maintain it as a record. When they find the lion, they've killed him, they see the collar. They panic. Now they think the game's up. They realize the lion is being studied and monitored. Take the collar off, stick it in a tree, and take the trophy. Take his head, or his skull at least, and his skin, and they get out of there as quickly as they can. What we found now is that they've actually probably paid someone to carry that collar for 2 days, trying to convince me that the lion's still alive. The collar moves from that point in a big circle several kilometers, sits under a tree for 4 hours, gets picked up and moved to a water hole, sits there 2 hours, brought back to the tree, moved in these circles so that I'm monitoring him, think he's still alive. This is all part of the ruse to get the client out of the country before people realize this lion's been killed. And it worked. I remember on the 4th of July, I wake up and check on my phone to see where the lion is. There's several lions that I'm checking where he is. And I see that Cecil's collar hasn't sent any GPS locations for that morning. The 4th. Bear in mind he was finished on the 2nd. So the collar is destroyed on the morning of the 4th. But at that point I don't know it. I just see the collar has stopped sending its points. I make a mental note to catch him because the battery must have died. There's no lion legally on quota that year, so I don't think anything untoward. The collar's just died. 3 days later, on the 7th of July, a professional guide comes to see me and says, Brent, I've heard a rumor a lion's been killed in that area. So immediately, my heart stops because I know it's Cecil. Ultimately, we knew he would die like that because he was the biggest. That's what hunters are obsessed with, big black-maned lions. Ultimately, we knew probably that's how he would die. I check his data. I see that his collar's been in a location for several hours, probably feeding on something, and then it's moved and switched off. Unbeknown to me, that data that I'm viewing is someone walking that collar around. Anyway, the investigators get onto the ground. They don't find anything immediately until they interview the trackers and the skinners from the hunting camp, and they lead them to Cecil's skeleton. So they've taken the head, they've taken the skin, and because it's 6 days later now, vultures have come in and it's just a skeleton. And now the story starts. So trophy hunting. Trophy hunting is not the most direct source of mortality for lions. We've got to make that abundantly clear. It's the most perverse, it's the most unnecessary, but it's not the biggest source of mortality in lions. There's a lot of threats that lions are facing day to day, trophy hunting being one of them. So you must appreciate that in Africa you have about 1 billion people, 1,000 million people, and in the next 30 years that's set to double. So we're likely going to have, by 2050, 2 billion Africans. Now you again must appreciate these are the poorest of the poor. My community, if they're lucky, my next door neighbors live on $1 a day per household. You might have bought a bottle of water today for a couple of dollars. That's 2 days that the average African household has to run, a whole family. So you must appreciate that yes, the population is increasing, but these people have a very small footprint on the planet. Okay, I'll come back to that point in a little while. So the African population is increasing, people are desperate, the soils are bad, we're getting climate change, Africa's getting drier, it's harder and harder to grow your food, it's harder and harder to raise livestock, and then you've got something like a lion in the landscape that in the night creeps in and kills your livestock. In Zimbabwe it's as direct as if you have a goat, you sell that goat in January, at the beginning of the school term, and your child goes to school that term. If that goat gets killed in the night, you literally wake up and you tell your child you're not going to school this term. It's as direct as that. There is no such thing as cash, there's no bank accounts. Your livelihood is in your livestock. So to live with a lion, it's very, very difficult. We all love lions, but believe me, Africans don't. And not because they are evil people or ignorant in any way. It's because they are living cheek to jowl with a big, dangerous predator that impacts their lives. Another point to put into your banks, because if we really care about the species, we have to take care of people's concerns. Okay, so lion trophy hunting, as I say, in our study from Oxford, maybe 10% of the lions that died in Oxford on our study died because of direct trophy hunting. 10%. Lions killing livestock, 40%. 40% of the lions die because they've killed livestock or they're a threat to livestock. So by far the biggest source of direct mortality of lions, in Wangi at least, but that statistic sort of runs true throughout Africa. 40% of lions are killed because of livestock conflict. The very slow and often unseen pressure that an expanding human population puts on protected areas. We've got these strongholds that are full of lions now and are healthy, but there's these growing human populations on the outside, and they need firewood to cook their food, and they need protein. They can't afford meat in the butcher shop, so in order to get protein for your family, people go into the protected area with wire snares, and they try and catch themselves something to eat. You and I, we feed our bodies protein, but we can go and get a burger. They need to go into the protected area and snare. So bushmeat poaching, snaring, is a double-edged sword for lions. It denudes the national parks, the protected areas of lion prey. If humans are competing with lions now and have killed all the prey species, there's nothing for the lions to eat. That's a catalyst for them to come out and eat cattle because there's no food to eat, there's no water to eat. The next thing is a lion is a big, confident kleptoparasite. Now that means that he's watching the skies for vultures. A man sets 10 or 12 snares for buffalo, he catches 3 or 4. He can only physically carry the meat from one. 3 buffalo carcasses are left in the bush, and the vultures find them. The lion sees the vultures, he assumes that another lion or hyenas have killed something. Well, he's the biggest on the block, he runs in there to go and steal it. He gets stuck in a snare. I've taken snares off many lions. Jericho, for instance, was caught in a wire snare that nearly killed him. I had to cut that wire off his neck, treat the wound, and remove his collar. So that's the double-edged sword of bushmeat poaching. Direct loss of prey and the direct killing of lions. Now it's the targeted poaching of lions. I would call this hunt poaching. It wasn't a hunt, it was a poaching incident. It wasn't legal, they came in there to get their lion off the books and they got caught, but that's poaching. The other side of illegal poaching is the direct targeting of lions, for instance, for the Asian lion bone market. Tigers traditionally were used, the tiger carcass, the bones were put into a wine and let stew for a while, and then that wine is sold as a tonic. Very valuable. But tigers are nearly extinct. So there's no discernible difference between a lion and a tiger bone. So obviously now the Asian market is looking to lions. They're a lot more abundant. Even though there's only 20,000 left, they're a lot more abundant than tigers. So they're replacing those tiger bones with lion bones. That's a huge potential threat. That one scares the woolies out of us. Because if the same economics that drive rhino horn start working on lion bones, I don't know how we're going to solve that. Okay, so it's a lot more complex than just trophy hunting. Now don't get me wrong, when I look at that photograph there of that lion, it moves me almost to tears. The thought of that animal dying to satisfy one man's ego and denying the rest of the world and my son's future, that he might not see that because someone with a bit more money wanted to stick that on a wall, it makes me sick. But it's not telling the whole story. Now we've said that conflict with lions is 43% compared to 10 of trophy hunting. There's a story that no one's talking about enough, and that is the direct link between trophy hunting and conflict. So now we've realized that trophy hunting is a driver of conflict. So although trophy hunting is less of a direct impact, it actually is a catalyst for conflict. And I'll explain that now. When a lion like Cecil is killed, By nature, he's the biggest in the landscape. That's what trophy hunters want. They want the big guy. They turned down Jericho because Cecil was bigger, right? Cecil was the father of those cubs because he was bigger. He dominated the breeding opportunities because he's the fittest. Survival of the fittest. Trophy hunting counters that whole evolutionary process. The hunter wants the biggest, removes him. The weaker lion that didn't get a chance to breed now gets a chance. He moves in and he would kill those cubs. Lion cubs are very dependent on their mothers until 2.5 to 3 years old. They need to hunt for a living. You can get a lamb, take it away from its mother. After it's weaned, put it out here, it's going to fend for itself. A lion can't. A lion needs to catch buffalo, it needs to catch giraffe. So it needs a long time with its mum to learn those skills. Thank you. What a sweetheart. So they need a long time to learn those skills. Now, the new male can't afford to wait for that lioness to see her cubs to adulthood before she's ready to breed again. He can't sit around twiddling his thumbs for 2.5, 3 years. In the meantime, someone else is going to chase him off and he's never got a chance to breed. So he quickly kills the cubs. It's a process called infanticide. He kills the cubs, she comes into estrus in 3 or 4 weeks. He mates and his genes are in the system. Remember, if that was natural, it would work perfectly. He's the strongest now, he's beaten the weaker guy, he's put his strong genes in the system. Lion population gets stronger. Trophy hunting flips it on its head, and now lions are getting weaker. Typical lion mums, like mums across the species barriers, just don't sit and let their youngsters get halved and killed. So they have two choices. They fight, in which case they often get killed, or they take those cubs and they run. There's only so much space that a lion can take her cubs and run. And where does she ultimately stop? Where she doesn't have to watch over her back for lions that would kill her cubs? People. She's amongst people now. The young male lion, Cecil's son, for instance, if Cecil was still in place, would leave his pride at about 3.5 to 4 years old. By that time, he's big, he weighs 200 kilograms, he's participated in hunts. The minute he leaves his mum's pride, he disperses, and he's strong enough to take a territory. And again, that's nice and healthy. If the father's removed early, new males come in, and those young males get a lot of aggression. So they leave early. Sometimes as early as sort of 16 months old. Now a lion that's 16 months old, small, he's inexperienced, he can't catch his natural prey, he certainly can't fight other adult lions for a territory. Where does he go that he doesn't get his ass handed to him? In amongst people. So the removing of that pride male sends cubs with their mums into conflict situations and sends the young males that are the sort of dispersal age lions in amongst people. And so you've got, that's the demographic that kills cattle. Females with cubs, young males. And this is what I've been doing for the last 7 of the 9.5 years, is after a trophy hunt, picking up the pieces for 7 or 8 months, going to meetings with angry people with axes, because they see me as the lion defender, and that lioness has just brought her cubs into their area and killed all their goats. The hunter is happy at home. He's got his lion on the wall. His mates are patting him on the back. He's been told that his trophy hunt was good for conservation. We're on the ground being chased around with axes, spat on. We are enemy number 1 because we seem to be defending the very animals that are impacting people's lives. Those lionesses get killed, poisoned, shot. Eventually the ones that survive, the cubs are all dead. They move back into the protected area, mate with the new males. Guess what? The next hunting season is there. Those new males get shot. I've seen lionesses that have had 5 or 6 litters over the course of time and not raised a single cub. This is the face of trophy hunting that no one is talking about, and I've seen it a million times. My job is to be going into a skinning shed, meeting a hunter, taking my collar back, photographing the teeth on the dead lion, knowing that in 3 weeks' time, I'm not going to see my wife for a week because I'm in amongst people trying to save a lion's life. So when we talk about trophy hunting, you've got to understand there's a lot more to it. Okay? It's a very, very complex situation. So where do we go from here? We know that lions are important to us in terms of our relationship with them. We know that these are the threats that they face. So how do we turn this story into something that's going to be good for lions? Well, I think lions are unique in that they occupy three very unique distinctions. The first being they are flagship species. I often say this in my talks, you wouldn't be here if a warthog had been shot. We're here because a lion was shot. You know, for some reason, we define certain animals as more attractive or find it more distasteful if a lion is killed rather than a warthog. So it's a flagship species, it attracts attention, it's sexy. That's lions. They're on everything. I mean, you can walk around this city particularly, you will see lion door knockers, you will see products using lion images. Brave is a lion, Bob Marley was the lion of Africa, the English football team are the three lions. We constantly use the image of lions because they attract attention. The next definition for a lion is a keystone species. A keystone is that lovely little piece at the top of an arch, a stone arch, that if you remove that stone, the whole thing collapses. Now we saw that in a beautiful video you should see on YouTube with the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone. It's absolute poetry. People didn't know how far denuded a place like Yellowstone was. People didn't realize how far. Now I feel like a celebrity.
Let's hear the roar. Let's hear the roar again. Wait, I'm gonna finish.
You can imagine I spent a lot of time alone in the bush practicing that. So Yellowstone National Park, this fantastic wilderness, an iconic space in this country. Wolves have been absent for decades, if not a century. But the reintroduction of wolves, well, have a look at that video, because scientists realize that by reintroducing wolves, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's some good people in the audience that know better than me, but reintroducing the wolves meant the elk didn't feed in the lowlands anymore, they fed up into the hills. The fact that they weren't feeding in the lowlands meant the spruce came back. If the spruce came back, certain migratory birds returned, beavers returned, beavers made dams, dams meant that a certain kind of fish came back. Because of those fish and those habitats, new insects came, new birds came. Rivers started changing their course because there's no longer this erosion that was seen from these large amounts of elk feeding on the riverbanks, just by introducing or reintroducing the apex predator. So keystone species. African savannas are wide open grasslands. If you leave them to rest, you can fence off a big part of Africa's savanna, and you think by leaving it to rest, it will recover, it will be stimulated. It's the opposite. That grassland dies out without the presence of buffalo and things like that. But now if you just put buffalo in there, without moving them, they overgraze and they kill the grass. So the role of a predator, particularly lion in the African ecosystems, is to keep big grazing animals in tight herds moving regularly. And if you do that, if you stimulate that, the grass is very productive. So that very ecosystem depends on the presence of that lion. We haven't fully understood or even investigated the nature of a lion's role in that ecosystem yet. And I think that's a glaring problem that we've actually got to have a look at as scientists, the role of a lion. But it's an keystone species. If we lose lions, the fabric of these ecosystems is going to collapse. And the third one is an umbrella species. Because a lion occupies the apex of the food pyramid, if you put all your energy into the conservation of lions, give them everything they need, you will find that by nature, the landscapes, the prey base, everything that lions need to survive that comes underneath them is being looked after. So even if you're unemotional about animals and lions, if you're just a businessman and you want to talk efficiency, efficient use of a dollar, put it into lions. Because by conserving lions, you're conserving buffalo, you're conserving warthogs, you're conserving grasslands, you're conserving rivers, you're conserving African cultures that are associated with lions. We put all our energy into lions. I believe that's the most efficient way to do it. We're often overwhelmed as conservationists. Where do you start? This planet is in such a state. Where do we start? Well, I promise you we start looking at these animals. This is the most efficient way to solve a lot of issues. But how do you do that? A study recently has said that trophy hunting is not doing enough. One of the big arguments for trophy hunting is that large areas of African wildlife habitat is kept as such because it brings in a return. As I said, Africa's population is increasing, African people are poor, so African governments are under a lot of pressure to see a return from a piece of land. If trophy hunting is removed, something else is going to take its place. Sure as nuts. Even though trophy hunting is not producing the money, we heard a figure of 3% of the money that's coming in from trophy hunts actually getting into the management on the ground or to the people on the ground. But even so, if trophy hunting is removed outright and we don't have an alternative in place, we're going to get goats in there, we're going to get that turning to mining. Big mining interests are going to come swoop in there and offer the government something, and they're going to get their concessions, and they're going to clear fell, and they're going to snare and eat everything, and we're going to lose that environment to lions anyway. Some of you might have been surprised early Cecil days when I was standing on a railway track, one of 100 interviews I did. You might have been surprised when I said I'm against lion hunting. It should never happen. We should never see it again. But let's be careful not to outright ban hunting. And I got a lot of stick for that, but let me explain that. We were so worried that the knee-jerk reaction of the Cecil story had moved people to such a degree that overnight we would lose trophy hunting. And you've heard my opinion on trophy hunting. It's obscene. There's no moral justification for it. But if trophy hunting ended overnight, there would be a coal miner in there the next day. And we, even because we're emotional, and that is our strength, we heard that earlier, I absolutely believe that's the human strength, but because we were so vocal, perhaps we could have done more harm. So that's the explanation for that statement. So that's my challenge, and that's your challenge, is to find an alternative to hunting. And it's a big ask. A study recently said that in order to conserve all of the protected areas, these are areas where no hunting is allowed, to adequately manage remaining lion habitat in protected areas is going to cost $1.2 billion US a year. That's an awful lot of money for an African economy. I come from the poorest country in the world. Zimbabwe is now considered the poorest country in the world. We don't even have our own currency. We use US dollars. We're actually running out of US dollars. So how can a country like that be asked to pay a bill like that? It's just not going to happen. So we've got to understand that African economies, African states cannot afford to pay for lions. It's considered a luxury. While you've got a starving populace, you can't talk about a hungry lion or a lion that needs space. You just can't. So that challenge falls on us. So 1.25 billion, it's an awful lot of money, but when I was here in April, you had a Powerball lottery that was 1.3 billion first prize. 3 ticket holders won that. They're probably in the south of France, snorting oysters, whatever you do with that sort of money. But those 3 people could have conserved all lion habitat for a year. It's not a lot of money when you talk about it in a global sense. So how do we get the world to recognize that they need to front that bill? Well, that's the ticket. Cecil is the answer. We've seen an unprecedented show of interest and passion across the world for an individual animal. We know how important lions are to our cultures, our ecosystem, our evolution, and that particular lion is the most famous of them all. So we propose, there's a few of us working behind the scenes, we propose to get the lion listed as the World Heritage Species. Now this is a concept that's never been seen to fruition yet. You have the Grand Canyon, you have Victoria Falls, these are all World Heritage sites. That's a recognition that these things are collectively owned by the human population of the world. Zimbabwe can't do anything that's going to affect Victoria Falls because it's a World Heritage species. We want the same for lions. Let lions be the first World Heritage species. Recognition that this is a sacred, sacred animal. Get your grubby hands off lions. And again, it's not a frivolous rhetoric from a man who's obsessed with lions. I've just described that this is the most efficient way of saving landscapes, saving all those other species that would never make it to their own rally. It's a way of representing 2 groups, 2 voiceless groups, and those are the animals and the people that have to live with them. So when I stand up here, I'm brutally honest. I know some of you might have criticisms, but that's fine because I'm here representing people that will never be flown to DC to come and tell you their point of view because they're too busy pumping water at a borehole or chasing elephants out of their fields. So I'm here representing the very people that have to live with these animals. So how can you help? Let's get this sorted. Let's get lions listed as a World Heritage species. Let's get that to our legislators. Let's get that into the general thinking of humans to say, hell no, touch off. Lions are something special, and we will not accept you selling that for $50,000. Our children might not see a lion because someone filled his pockets with $50,000. Frankly, it's unacceptable. And that's what we're devoting our energy to. We've got a small petition, and I say small, it's infuriating. I saw that there was a petition to get Obama onto the Ellen show. It got 250,000 signatures overnight. We've had this World Heritage Species petition. We've got 15,000 signatures after close to a year. We're trying to think at how to rebrand that, how to inspire it, but perhaps we've just seen it. Humans think Pokemon is more important than the animals that we live with, the environment that we control. So that's our challenge. If there's anything that you can take away from this, is go home, plant seeds, get online, get excited about lions, get as passionate about lions as I am. Thank you for that. And let's try and do something for this animal. Let that be Cecil's legacy, that he didn't die in vain, that his skin is not folded up, dried, sitting in an evidence locker in Zimbabwe for eternity. Let's make sure that that lion lives through his genes, through his offspring, and let's make sure that never happens again. Thank you.
Ah!